as even the so-called experts have been forced to admit climate change isn't the cause of these bushfires. But there's no doubt, and I'm not alone here, that 2 decades plus of climate change activism is making them worse. If you were inclined to believe the activists, the Greens and the others, what's your explanation then for all the other bushfire catastrophes over the past 100 years or more, starting with the Black Thursday bushfire in Victoria way back in 1851? Australia has always been, as the poem says, a land of droughts and flooding rains. So not only are the Greens insulting our intelligence, claiming that climate change inaction is behind these fires, they're politicising a crisis. Warren Mundine hit the nail on the head today with this tweet. Referencing, of course, 60,000 years of Indigenous land management through the controlled use of fire, Mundine says, "I cry every year at the loss of lives and properties. When are so-called technically advanced people going to listen to how they did that?" These days, it's hard to think of any problem that the green religion isn't making worse. Obviously, right now, we've got these bushfires, a now national emergency, that have been made worse by over-the-top restrictions on hazard reduction burns. Numerous firefighters, including the head of New South Wales's Volunteer Firefighters Association, testified to the difficulty of getting permission to burn during the off-season, saying today, and I quote, "We have to accept that fuel loads are a problem, and locking up national parks, as we've been doing for a long time, is finally catching up with us." Now, I accept that we don't want indiscriminate burning, but it must be made easier to get permission to put in off-season burns, especially at the interface between the bush and people's homes. As the head of the Volunteer Firefighters confirmed to the Daily Telegraph this morning, and I quote him here again, "Because there's so much red tape involved, less actual burning is done," stating that New South Wales fire authorities currently perform hazard reduction burns on less than 1% of fire-prone land each year. 1%. This is something that the New South Wales National Party ministers are right to be concerned about in New South Wales, and let's hope their Liberal colleagues don't put it in the too hard basket once the current emergency has passed. But the bushfire crisis is just the latest and currently most obvious example of how green zealotry is contaminating so many areas of public policy. Getting new dams built is almost impossible because of green activism. The relevant Victorian Labor minister has even said there's no point building new dams because they'll never fill, even though next time there's a flood, that too will be attributed by the activists to climate change. Then there's the impossibility of getting a new coal-fired power station built in Australia, despite Australian coal firing dozens of newly built stations in Japan, China, India and Europe. Again, it's the green religion that says we can't have the cheapest form of baseload power because this might increase Australian emissions, even though Australia's total emissions each year are less than just China's increases in emissions alone. Not their total, just their increases. And the real problem here is, of course, the unwillingness of mainstream politicians, Liberal and Labor, to contradict green propaganda. In Labor's case, it's because the Greens have become their de facto coalition partners. In the Liberals' case, it's because no one wants to be accused of, quote, denying the science, even though there are plenty of eminent scientists, including the world's foremost atmospheric scientist, the MIT's Richard Lindzen, who question the climate cult. And don't get me started on the way the Greens are so often culture war activists too, on gender issues, on education, and their thinly veiled anti-Semitism, as we've seen with Greens candidates as well. Over recent days, yes, it's been good to see premiers and prime ministers focused on what needs to happen now in the midst of this fire emergency. Ultimately, though, we expect them to lead. And that means telling the truth about the problems we face in Australia, We face frequent natural disasters. We always have, and sadly, we always will. Preparedness, dams, water catchment strategy, hazard burns, the lot should be part of what we do and do well. But what we must never do is make things worse because our leaders shy away from the arguments they need to have and the Greens' misinformation that they must counter.